with a grateful heart, give thanks to the Holy One.
Genesis 37. Jacob continued to live in the land they were occupying, where his father had journeyed in the territory of Canaan. This is a record of Jacob's descendants. When Joseph was 17 years old, he was helping his brothers tend their flocks. He was a young man at that time, as were the children of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. But Joseph would come back and tell his father that his brothers were doing bad things. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his brothers, since he was born to him in his old age, so he had made a richly embroidered tunic for him. When Joseph's brothers realized that their father loved him more than all of his brothers, they hated him so much that they were unable to speak politely to him. Right about this time, Joseph had a dream and then told it to his brothers. As a result, his brothers hated him all the more. "Let me tell you about this dream that I had," he said. "We were tying sheaves together out in the middle of the fields, when all of a sudden, my sheaf stood up erect. And then your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." At this, his brothers replied, "Do you really think you're going to rule us or lord it over us?" So they hated him even more because of his dreams and his interpretations of them. But then he had another dream, and he proceeded to tell his brothers about that one, too. "I had another dream," he said. "The sun, moon, and 11 of the stars were bowing down before me." When Joseph told his father about this, his father rebuked him and asked him, "What kind of dream is that? Will I, your mother, and your brothers really come to you and bow down to the ground in front of you?" As a result, his brothers became more envious of him. But his father kept thinking about all of this. Some time later, his brothers left to tend their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel instructed Joseph, "Your brothers are tending the flock in Shechem. Come here, because I'm going to send you to them." "Here I am," he responded. "Go and see how things are with your brothers," Israel ordered him. "And see how things are with the flock. Bring back a report for me." Then he sent Joseph from the valley of Hebron. When Joseph reached Shechem, a man found him wandering around in a field. So the man asked him, "What are you looking for?" "I'm searching for my brothers," he responded. "Tell me, where are they tending the flock?" "They've already left," the man answered. "I heard them saying that they were headed to Dothan." So Joseph followed his brothers to Dothan and found them there. Now as soon as they saw him approaching from a distance, before he arrived they plotted together to kill him. "Look," they said. "Here comes the dream master. Come on. Let's kill him and toss him into one of the cisterns. Then we'll report that some wild animal devoured him and wait to see what becomes of his dreams." When Reuben heard about it, he tried to save Joseph from their plot. "Let's not do any killing," Reuben told them. "And no bloodshedding, either. Instead, let's toss him into the cistern that's way out here in the wilderness. But don't lay a hand on him." Reuben intended to free Joseph and return him to his father. As it was, when Joseph arrived where his brothers were, they stripped off the tunic that Jacob had given him, that is, the richly embroidered tunic that he was wearing. They grabbed him and tossed him into the cistern, but the cistern was empty. There was no water in it. After this, while they were seated, eating their food, they looked around and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with camels carrying spices, balm, and myrrh for sale down in Egypt. Then Judah suggested to his brothers, "Where's the profit in just killing our brother and shedding his blood? Come on. Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. That way, we won't have laid our hands on him. After all, he's our brother, our own flesh." So Judah's brothers listened to him. As the Midianite merchants were passing through, they extracted Joseph from the cistern and sold Joseph for 20 pieces of silver to the Ishmaelites, who then took Joseph down to Egypt. Later, when Reuben returned to the cistern, Joseph wasn't there. In mounting panic, he tore his clothes, returned to his brothers, and shouted, "He's not there. Now what? Where am I to go?" So they took Joseph's coat, slaughtered a young goat, and dipped the coat in the blood. Then they stretched out the richly embroidered tunic to dry, and brought it to their father. "We've found this," they reported. "Look at it and see if this is or isn't your son's tunic." Examining it, he cried out, "It's my son's tunic." A wild animal has no doubt torn Joseph to pieces. So Jacob tore his clothes, dressed himself in sackcloth, and then mourned many days for his son. All his sons and daughters showed up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. He kept saying, "Leave me alone. I'll go down to the next world, still mourning for my son." So Joseph's father wept for him. Meanwhile, down in Egypt, the Midianites sold Joseph to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's court officials, who was also commander-in-chief of the imperial guards.
Give thanks with a grateful heart. Give thanks to the Holy One.
Genesis 38. Right about then, Judah left his brothers and went to live with an Adullamite man named Hira. There Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. He married her, had sexual relations with her, and she conceived, bore a son, and named him Er. Later, she conceived again, bore another son, and named him Onan. Then she bore yet another son and named him Shelah. Judah was living in Chizib when she bore him. Judah found a wife for his oldest son Er. Her name was Tamar. But the Lord considered Er, Judah's oldest son, to be wicked, so he put him to death. So Judah instructed Onan, "You are to have sexual relations with your dead brother's wife, performing the duty of a brother-in-law with her, and have offspring for your brother." But Onan knew that the offspring wouldn't be his own heir, so whenever he had sexual relations with his brother's wife, he would spill his semen on the ground to avoid fathering offspring for his brother. The Lord considered what Onan was doing to be evil, so he put him to death, too. After this, Judah told his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Go live as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up." But he was really thinking, otherwise, Shelah might die like his brothers. So Tamar left and lived in her father's house. Some years later, Shua's daughter, that is, Judah's wife, died. As Judah was grieving, he visited the shearers of his flock in Timnah, accompanied by his Adullamite friend Hira. "Look," somebody reported to Tamar, "your father-in-law is going to Timnah to shear his sheep." So she took off her mourning apparel, covered herself with a shawl, and concealed her outward appearance. Then she went out and sat at the entrance of Enaim, which is on the way to Timnah, because she knew that even though Shelah had grown up, she wasn't being given to him as his wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, since she had concealed her face. So on the way, he turned aside, approached her, and said, "Come on. Let's have some sex." But he didn't realize that he was talking to his own daughter-in-law. "What will you give me," she asked, "in order to have sex with me?" "I'll send you a young goat from the flock," he responded. But she pressed him, asking, "What security will you put up until you've sent it?" Then he asked, "What pledge do you want me to give you?" "Your signet ring, cord, and the staff in your hand," she suggested. So he gave them to her, had sex with her, and she became pregnant by him. Then she got up and left. Later, she took off her shawl and put on her mourning clothes. Later on, Judah sent his Adullamite friend to take her a young goat, intending to retrieve what he had put up as security from the woman, but he could not find her. He asked the men who live in that area, "Where's that temple prostitute who was sitting alongside the road at Enaim?" But they replied, "There's been no temple prostitute here." So he returned to Judah and said, "I haven't found her." Also, the men who are from there said, "There's been no prostitute here." Then Judah said, "Let her have those things. Otherwise, we'll become contemptible. I sent this young goat, but you didn't find her." 3 months later, it was reported to Judah, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar has turned to prostitution. And look, she's pregnant because of it." "Bring her out," Judah responded. "Let's burn her to death." While they were bringing her out, she sent this message to her father-in-law, "I am pregnant by the man to whom these things belong." Furthermore, she added, "Tell me to whom the signet ring, cord, and staff belongs." When Judah recognized them, he admitted, "She is more upright than I, because I never did give her my son Shelah." And he never had sex with her again. Later, when it was time for Tamar to give birth, she was carrying twins in her womb. While she was giving birth, one of them put out his hand, so the midwife grabbed it and tied something scarlet around his hand, observing, "This one came out first." As it was, he withdrew his hand, and then his brother was born. Amazed, the midwife cried out loud, "What's this? A breech birth." So that boy was named Perez. Afterwards, his brother came out, and around his hand was the scarlet. So they named him Zerah.
Give thanks with a grateful heart. Give thanks to the Holy One.
Genesis 39. Meanwhile, Joseph had been delivered to Egypt and turned over to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's court officials and the commander-in-chief of the imperial guards. An Egyptian, he bought Joseph from the Ishmaelites, who had brought him down there. But the Lord was with Joseph. He became a very prosperous man while in the house of his Egyptian master, who could see that the Lord was with Joseph, because the Lord made everything prosper that Joseph did. That's how Joseph pleased Potiphar as he served him. Eventually, Potiphar appointed Joseph as overseer of his entire household. Moreover, he entrusted everything that he owned into his care. From the time he appointed Joseph to be overseer over his entire household and everything that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The Lord's blessing rested on Joseph, whether in Potiphar's household or in Potiphar's fields. Everything that he owned, he entrusted into Joseph's care. He never concerned himself about anything, except for the food he ate. Now Joseph was well built and good looking. That's why, sometime later, Joseph's master's wife looked straight at Joseph and propositioned him, "Come on. Let's have a little sex." But he refused, telling his master's wife, "Look, my master doesn't have to worry about anything in the house with me in charge, and he has entrusted everything into my care. No one has more authority in this house than I do. He has withheld nothing from me, except you, and that's because you're his wife. So how can I commit such a horrible evil? How can I sin against God?" She kept on talking to him like this day after day, but he wouldn't listen to her. Not only would he refuse to have sex with her, he refused even to stay around her. One day, though, he went into the house to do his work. None of the household servants were inside, so she grabbed Joseph by his outer garment and demanded, "Let's have some sex." Instead, Joseph ran outside, leaving his outer garment still in her hand. When she realized that he had left his outer garment right there in her hand, she ran outside and yelled for her household servants. "Look," she cried out. "My husband brought in a Hebrew man to humiliate us. He came in here to have sex with me, but I screamed out loud. When he heard me starting to scream, he left his outer garment with me and fled outside." She kept his outer garment by her side until Joseph's master came home, and then this is what she told him, that Hebrew slave whom you brought to us came in here to rape me. But when I started to scream, he left his outer garment with me and ran outside." When Joseph's master heard his wife's claim to the effect that "this is how your servant treated me," he flew into a rage, arrested Joseph, and locked him up in the same prison where the king's prisoners were confined. So Joseph remained there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph. He extended gracious love to him, causing the prison warden to be pleased with Joseph. So the prison warden entrusted into Joseph's care all the prisoners who were confined in prison. Whatever they did, Joseph was in charge of the work detail. The prison warden did not have to worry about anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with him. That's why Joseph prospered in everything he did.
Give thanks with a grateful heart. Give thanks.